Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for other writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is author Stefany Valentine. We're going to be talking to her about herself and her new book, First Love Languages. Stefany, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, like to kick off the new year and everything.
Oh, my pleasure. And yes, it is a great way to start the 2025 overall. We'll start
Yes.
with that. Okay, as viewers and listeners are familiar, we like to start things off talking about things we may have read or watched. Did we like them? Did we not like them? Were we kind of like, that doesn't really do much for me? I'll go first just to give Stefany a little chance to kind of gather her thoughts. I had to take an impromptu flight back east, and so the movie I watched on the way back was The Wild Robot, which I had wanted to see in theaters, but it kind of came and went really quickly. I really enjoyed it. It was very charming, a great animation, really good story, and it was a great movie to watch as a writer because watching all the different subplots that they developed over the course of the story, that was really good. And I tried to watch Jason Wright, I think it's Jason Reitman, Saturday night, the one about the first night Saturday Night Live was on, but the sound was awful, so I had to give up after about 10 minutes. So then I just went to sleep. So I'm sure I'll catch it somewhere else. Stefany, what about you? Anything good or bad on the reading and or watching front?
Some of my most recent reads are The Backyard Bird Chronicles. I myself am an avid bird watcher, and so it has been hilarious to read Amy Tan, I believe that's the name of the author, her story, her essays about being an avid bird watcher, how obsessed she is with birds, because I get it on like a solar level. And also I just started watching Squid Game 2, the season 2. It's been really good. I'm on episode 5 right now. But yeah, so probably as soon as I get off of this call, I'm gonna watch episode 5 and see how far I can get.
Oh wow. Okay. I watched season one, but I'm just not as keen on watching season two. I don't. Is
Um,
it any different from season one, or like slightly
I
different?
I feel like the main character is definitely he in season 1 he was very like happy, like go lucky, kind of like, oh, nothing will ever happen to me, but he's definitely completely changed in season 2. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but they do incorporate a little something
Okay.
that keeps it very interesting, keeps me on my toes.
Hmm.
And overall, I just love any kind of critique of capitalism. And yeah.
Okay, that's a good way to watch shows. Okay, so Stephanie Valentine, we are here to talk about your new book, First Love Languages, but let's
Yeah.
start things off talking a little bit about you. I mean, what is your background? Were you always a writer as a kid? Were you a voracious reader? Were you very averse, like, oh, books, there, no, no, thank you? Or were you kind of like, oh, books, gimme, gimme, gimme?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I would say that I have always had an affinity for storytelling. So I like the main character in First Love Language. I am also an adoptee, and so when I reconnected with my biological mom, she would tell me how I always loved hearing stories. I was always the first one to be like, "Mom, tell me a story," and like I always love to sit and listen, which is really interesting because to this day I prefer audiobooks over tangibly reading. But also, I am dyslexic. And so, growing up, when I didn't really realize I was dyslexic, I hated reading because, like, when you're dyslexic, reading is so hard. And for me personally, it almost physically hurts to read sometimes. It like puts me to sleep also. And I also have this strange sort of like synesthesia thing where, like, if I read for too long, I start to hear music. And so, audiobooks all the way. I can listen to like hours and hours and hours of audiobooks, but like reading tangibly, even reading my own writing as an author, it's very difficult for me to do.
Actually, that raises a great point. I mean, with dyslexia, is that make it more challenging to actually write a book?
Lately, no, because I have really utilized a lot of voice to text.
Okay.
So, I think people get like all up in arms about like AI taking over, but like AI is also very accessible for people with disability too. So that's the way that I kind of like choose to look at it. Without voice to text, I wouldn't be as skilled of an author as I am today because it would take me much longer to get through my own manuscripts and stuff.
Sure, sure. So, growing up, or even to this day, are there any authors that you just kind of like, oh, hey, as soon as I hear this author has a new book coming out, I've got to get it, or I've got to listen to it?
Mhm. Let me see. I've been on kind of like a Anne Leong kind of kick lately. Love her writing. Again, it's like that contemporary romance thing, and I think she does a really good job with craft and voice and character and everything. Oh man, I have my friend Raven K. Stringfield. Her book just came out earlier this year. It's called Love Requires Chocolate. There was
Great
something
title.
about that. Yeah. It's a fluffy little rom-com. It's like Emily in Paris, I think. I think that's one of the comps. I've never watched Emily in Paris. But yeah, just like a fluffy like rom-com chocolate, obviously lots of
Hmm.
sightseeing. That again was like just so fun and like fluffy to read, and I'm so excited for her next book, which comes out later this year. It's called Love in 280 characters. But I'm really kind of vibing on like bite-sized reads when it comes to like books. I love anthologies. Amy Tan's Backyard Bird Chronicles was like a bunch of essays with pictures incorporated into it. My friend Raven K. Stringfield's upcoming sophomore novel, Love in 100 or Love in to 180 characters is it's a story, it's a love story written in text messages and emails and tweets and everything. And so you're not your typical like chunks of words. So when
Hmm.
it comes to reading in that front, I really tend to gravitate towards that because like it's just so much easier for my dyslexic brain. It something about like seeing bite-sized pieces also helps me just kind of like understand what I'm reading a little bit better too.
Okay, well that's great. You know what? I forgot. Even though we're talking about your book,
Yeah.
First Love Languages,
Uh-huh.
I forgot to read your bio. So we'll do that, which is
Yeah.
on the
Oh
back of the book.
yeah.
Stefany Valentine is an emerging young adult author. Her first publication is featured in the adoptee anthology, like you were just talking about, When We Become Ours, and her sophomore title, Love Makes Mochi, is expected to release with Joy Revolution in 2026. So that's next year. Follow her for
Mhm.
updates on TikTok, Instagram, and X at Books by Stefany, Stefany, and on her website, stephanievalentine.wordpress.com. But we'll do links again at the end of the show. Okay, so let us start talking about your book, First Love Languages. Here's a cover again.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for the story? And
Mhm.
without giving any spoilers, or
Yeah.
as many as much information as you can provide, what does the title mean?
Yeah, so first love language is essentially it's very much inspired by my own life. I kind of came up with the idea of it after reading The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X. Pan. And for the first time, like as a Taiwanese adoptee, as a biracial Taiwanese, I kind of had an estranged relationship to my Taiwanese identity. And it was something that I always knew about myself, but it was like, I don't really know how I feel about it though. And it wasn't until I read The Astonishing Color of After where I kind of like saw a character who was biracial Taiwanese and had like an estrangement to her culture. I was like, wait a minute, you mean I'm allowed to feel this way? And so that's kind of ultimately where First Love Language is born. Is it was I wrote it in 2020 when like I finally realized, you know what, I need to be vulnerable with myself about my identity. And so that is essentially what the story is about. Like, yes, it's about like going on fake dates inspired by the love languages, but it's really about a character who learns to become who she is. And I hope that like when readers pick it up, they feel a layer of authenticity to it because like it really is like so deeply inspired by my own lived experiences. And I've also like had a couple of other people like early reviewers tell me that like this book really helped them like understand more about themselves, help them feel seen, especially in the adoptee community, because
Hmm.
there are very few books with there are a lot of books with adoptee characters, but never are they written by adoptee authors. And so when you actually come across a book about a marginalized community that is so marginalized, people tend to forget that adoptees are a marginalized community, and written by like an actual adoptee. I think like just about every other adoptee that I've come across has been like, wow, this is the first book that's like written by an adoptee that I've come across. So I'm really excited, and I hope that like it inspires more adoptees, of course, to share their stories because like there is no one adoptee story, and this just happens to kind of be mine.
Sure, sure. Actually, that does raise a great point. I mean, how
Mhm,
does a story about an adoptee main character written by an
mhm.
adoptee, how is that different from, say, someone who not adopted?
Yeah. So I think personally for me, in a lot of the stories that I've read, I think people tend to streamline the adoptee narrative a little bit too much, and they're just like, oh, for instance, Harry Potter, like, okay, this poor orphan is adopted by his aunts and uncles or whatever. Like, here's the sympathy card. And that's as far as it goes. That's as
Hmm.
deep as it goes. But people don't realize that when you're adopted, you have an identity, you have such a deep identity crisis. You have low self-esteem. You're a chronic people pleaser because you don't feel comfortable in the family that you're in. You're kind of gaslit all the time into thinking that you should be happy. Just be happy because like you were adopted. Oh, you would have been thrown out on the streets if you hadn't been adopted. Kind of having your entire life held hostage. That's what it means to like actually be an adoptee. And so I think when people, especially in like writing and literature, where like you have room to explore layers and depth and intersectionality, it does such a deep disservice to the adoptee community to not incorporate the reality and the layers of it and to just be like, sympathy card, here we go, and caricaturize like a deep and full person. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do with Katie is really show the layers to her, her relationship to herself, her relationship to her job, her relationship with her first love, relationship with sister, her relationship with her adoptive mother, her relationship to her Taiwanese heritage. Like there are so many deep layers to adoptee characters, and I really hope that like future adoptee listeners are like people who have been adopted or experience adoption, that they can kind of like really see that we are so much more than what the mainstream media kind of paints us to be.
Okay, no, I totally get that. I mean, my daughter is adopted as well, and but
Yeah.
she's also never
Hmm.
really expressed that much interest in
Hmm.
exploring the culture for in where she was born. But and she's
Yeah.
fully embraced, the lifestyle that we live. So
Yeah.
and so we didn't want to force it on her. We totally left it up to her, and she's quite happy with how the way things worked out. But I guess it's different for everybody.
Yeah, and I think too when you're young, like you're also kind of a lot more impressionable to
Hmm.
parents. Like I didn't really realize like I felt such a deep layer of estrangement to my identity until I had the room to explore that. And
Hmm.
that's just my story. And like I said, there's no one adoptee narrative. This just happens to be mine.
Sure, sure. And actually, that kind of leads to my next question. So, how
Mhm.
much of the story is, I
Mhm.
want to say autobiographical or at least
Mhm.
influenced by some of your experiences or maybe by some other adoptees that, that are
Yeah.
within your network or your community?
Yeah, definitely. So, Katie's Taiwanese-ness is very much inspired by my own. Her working
Hmm.
in a salon is also very much inspired by my day job. I'm an esthetician. And the fact that she is Mormon, but not exactly practicing, how she kind of has an estranged relationship with her spirituality as well. Also very much inspired by me. I grew up Mormon as well. And I feel that religion and being adopted, they kind of intersect in the sense, especially when you're talking about identity,
Hmm.
because those are things that are core values to identity. For instance, religion is kind of like, well, how do I express my spirituality? And then I feel like family is adoption is very much like, well, how is my relationship with my family? So I think those are also things that kind of can build up a person's identity. And let's see, what else is do Katie and I have in common? Oh, she lost her father when she was young, same as me.
Okay.
Growing up with a lot of loss and heartache and just generally a lot of struggles. Growing up, I used to really, man, I would journal about how miserable my life was. And I was like, man, this sucks. Like I hated my origin story. And now that I'm an adult, I'm like, yeah, monetize off that trauma. Let's go. It's coming from a place of sincerity. So, I mean, I don't think it negates the fact that it happened, but like it's paying it allowed for it gave me enough of a paycheck to be able to fly to Taiwan to meet my biological mom. So there is a
Ah,
win
okay.
there. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things I always find fascinating
Mhm.
when I'm talking to an author who's written some kind of YA material,
Yeah.
that you're an adult and
Mhm.
you're writing about characters of a certain age, probably in for most of the authors that I've talked to, it's in their semi-recent past. So, what is your process for writing with that
Mhm.
audience in mind and writing for those characters? I mean, do you do research? Do you have, friends with teenage children that you kind of go to them and say, is this something that kids still say, or like, how accurate is this? Is this like what high school is like? Is this how? This is what,
Mhm.
Friday night, when you've got no parents around, is this what it's like? That sort of thing. I mean, what is your I guess boils down to what is your research process for writing a YA story?
Honestly, it's just like the prompt that I give myself is what did I do when I was 17? Or like, what did I do when I was like 15? And that's kind of where I go with things, but also like having that retrospective ability to be like, well, this is what I wish could have happened when I was 17. And
Hmm.
so that was sort of the prompt, I guess, that I gave myself going into first love language is like, dang, if I was 17 and I had the resources that Katie has in first love language, like where would I be? Like what would that look like? And it's just kind of like that's where the story is born, or and that's the backdrop of the story.
And have you used, I guess, utilized, I guess we can call them teenage beta readers, kind of like saying, how accurate is this? Is this what it's like? And they come back and say,
Mhm.
oh, this is spot on. This is, you're
Mhm.
totally wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. I mean, what kind of feedback did you receive, or
Yeah.
did you even pursue that kind of information?
No, I didn't exactly look to like teenage beta readers. More than anything, I tried to make my story timeless. So I
Mm.
avoided using slang that kind of like says, okay, this is clearly Gen Z or Gen Alpha or whatever. But also I think oh, dang, what was I gonna say? I think also like having a great editor behind everything, she really helped me kind of like, yeah, this sounds like something a teenager would do. I think having an editor who specializes in children's books too
Hmm.
was just like a great tool, great asset. I have to shout out Elizabeth Lee, my incredible editor, because this story wouldn't be what it is without her input as well. And I think she really helped in kind of streamlining Katie's teen voice as well. So I had that professional help on that end.
That's fantastic. Okay, so the story is told in first person via
Mhm.
our protagonist, Katie. So was that your approach from the outset, or was it something that developed over the course of developing, or did you maybe start thinking, okay, I'm going to tell this in third person, but as you were working on it, realized, oh, this would be much better if we kind of saw everything through her eyes and we were able to hear her thoughts, so to speak.
You know, what is so wild about this story is so before I even landed an agent, I had written 7 books. They were all like sci-fi fantasy, and they were all third person, and they were all multiple POV. And when I wrote every other story, I was like, okay, this is going to sell because this is trending. This is going to sell because it's trending.
Hmm.
And I did that for like a decade, and I was in the career trenches for a decade. And but 2020 was different because like for some reason I was just like, you know what? Let me write a story for me because every other story that I'd written was for the marketplace. And so that's where I kind of challenged myself and I did first person. Originally, the draft was in past tense, but again,
Hmm.
my incredible editor was like, hey, let's make it present tense. And I was like, you know what? You're so right. But also, present tense is just easier for me to read and comprehend as like a dyslexic person for whatever reason. I think it's because there's less words when you're using present tense. So that was really helpful to me as well. And then also I realized that with first person, you could really get into Katie's head. You could really get into Katie's emotions and everything. And that is what this story is about. Is it's about Katie as a person. And so of course it had to be in like first person, and of course it had to be in like present tense because it just like that's just how the story needed to be told.
Okay, no, I totally get that.
Yeah.
So was the story fully formed when you started, or did it kind of
Mhm.
take time to map it out? And the question that I ask a lot of writers, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? One of those, I'm just going to see where the characters
Yeah.
take me, or did you have a pretty
Yeah.
strong idea of what the story was going to be and how it was going to
Mhm.
play out?
Yeah. I personally, I am definitely a plotter. I think it really helps with like my brain, the way that my brain just kind of thinks. But also for me, because I'm dyslexic, in order for me to make sense of other things, I kind of need to be able to parallel them to other things. And so this whole play of like language, of on one end being about love languages, and on the other end being about Mandarin lessons and about the miscommunication along the way, thematically, like I just kind of knew that it needed to explore language, if not as like a an A plot, definitely as like a B or a C plot, or thematically at least. And so when I was plotting out this story, I was like, okay, well, there's 5 love languages. Maybe I can turn them into 5 separate beats of the story. So I plotted out, you know, every little date inspired by each of the love languages. And then I had to like wrap it up at the end. But the initial draft was very different than the final draft. We ended up having to cut one of the fake dates and
Oh,
stuff, and Yeah, just to make room for everything else, I think, because like I think by cutting out some of like the dating, it made so much more room for like Katie's reflection and
Hmm.
introspection and all of that, and ultimately that I feel like that is what the story is about.
Okay. Did you ever find yourself kind of like working your way through it? Maybe this was early in
Mhm.
the plotting stage that you were working and working, think, oh,
Mhm.
this just isn't going anywhere, and decide, okay,
Yeah.
I need to take a couple of steps back. I need to,
Yeah.
I have to retrace back to this point, find out like where did
Mhm.
things start going off the rails? Not that it
Yes.
was that bad, but just kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
this isn't working. I need to
Oh
wipe it
yeah.
away and start again.
Absolutely. I think so many writers get to exactly what you're talking about, that spot in the writing process where you're kind of like, oh, it's not working. And you do have to backpedal and be like, okay, well, where did it start going off track? And I think for me, I feel like there's a pattern in writing, and it's like action, repercussion, action, repercussion. And so if I want like some type of repercussion to happen, I first need an action to happen. And so sometimes if I'm jumping into that repercussion, I'm like, okay, well, why isn't it working? Well, there needs to be like a type of action in the way or something like that. But yeah, if I'm stuck at a certain point, I almost have to go back like a chapter or two, figure out what went wrong, and then rewrite it and move forward. But yeah, it's kind of like, you get stuck and then you just eat or back up, and then kind of like when you're doing that parallel parking thing.
Hmm. And so did that was that really helpful in like maybe like you were working, you found yourself stuck, we were kind of like, okay, I need to find a solution to this. Was it really just about trying to think your way through it, or was it more like, okay, let me take a few steps
Mhm.
back and find out, okay, where did things start to go a little off?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I plotted it pretty well because I've really realized that like plotting saves time overall.
Hmm.
Or for me personally, I think plotting really does save time. I think understanding like the beats in like Save the Cat, for instance, I think that's like my holy grail of plotting. Like if you can plot Save the Cat, then you can make room for pantsing along the way. And also just recognizing like the pattern of like action consequence, or like action resolution, depending on like where you're trying to take the story. But yeah, like this was definitely it's definitely been through phases, and I think the first phase of it was just like me like just kind of word vomiting ideas, and then the second phase was with my incredible editor and my incredible team at Penguin. And shout out to them because they really helped me, I think, hone in and fine tune a lot of the skills that I just hadn't developed in my 10 years of querying.
Sure, sure. Shout out to the editing staff. So
Yes.
okay, you did mention Save the Cat, so I'm very familiar with that, as a lot of
Yeah.
the viewers and listeners are, because my thing is screenwriting. And so
Oh yeah.
with screenwriting, they say that every character, even like someone who just has one line or just,
Mhm.
it plays some kind of pivotal role in a scene, no matter how small, that in
Yeah.
some aspect, that character is in some aspect of the writer's personality. Like, that's something I would do, or maybe it's an opposite. That's something I
Mhm.
wouldn't do. So,
Yeah.
would you say that applies to you and a lot of the characters of First Love Language? I mean, obviously, Katie,
Mhm.
you said is very, almost autobiographical. But I mean, like, what
Mhm.
about her sister or like her mother or the relatives that they stay with? I mean, are they aspects
Mhm.
of Stephanie, or are they kind of like this? This is someone Stephanie really knows very well in real life.
Oh yeah, they are definitely inspired by people I know in real life. I will say the only, like, for instance, I think there are two characters that I kind of like made up. One of them would be Toby,
Hmm.
because I never dated anybody when I was in high school, and so it was kind of like, well, who would I have dated? And so I kind of like created a character, and I think some of the feedback that I've gotten from First Love Language is that overall it feels very queer. And I will say that like as I was writing this, I was kind of coming to terms with my own like sexuality as I was writing this, because again, I grew up Mormon, but I low key kind of knew that I was some type of queer, and it took me a long time to finally put it into words. And so I was talking to another like bisexual reader, and she was like, "Yeah, Toby is different. Like he just I love him so much." And I'm like, "Yeah, I think it's because like I wrote him for the bi girlies. Like, yeah, it's a hetero relationship, but like it's I feel like Toby's the kind of guy that like a bi girl would be like, oh my God, I love him." And it was so validating for another bisexual girl to be like, oh my God, yes. So that was really fun. And then another thing was another character that I think I kind of made up was the mom, in the sense that like I felt like my mom did the best that she could for us when we were growing up. But like I could have been a different person if my mom had just like asked me different questions. And so I really wanted to create like a happy place for Katie and for myself and for other adoptee readers of like this is what it could look like if a parent was just curious about our culture or curious about what we wanted to do and a little bit more proactive in recognizing the fact that like as adoptees like we are a little different. And so that's kind of like where I got to be able to explore the realm of like different characters, but characters that like were deeply inspired. Definitely Mavis. I have four sisters, so obviously Mavis was easy to write. Rayleigh, again, super easy to write. Just pulled her from my siblings. And then Aunt Joanna and Uncle Nick, like the super hardcore Mormons. Oh yeah, so easy to write those characters.
Of
If
course,
anything,
of
I feel
course.
like yeah, if anything, I feel like my publishing team was kind of like, okay, you need to dial back on this, and I'm like, okay, all right, bet, because like it was a bit heavy, it was a bit more heavy-handed the first time around. I had a lot to get off my chest, I
Okay,
think.
well, before I get to the aunt and uncle, I do want to ask, so where do you fall in the
Yeah,
five siblings ranking?
yeah.
Are you like the oldest? Are you the youngest? Are you like number four?
I'm the second oldest of nine,
Oh
technically,
my
because
gosh.
it's a mixed family because my siblings and I got adopted into
Got it.
my adopted mom's family. So I'm the second oldest, oldest daughter, and then there's four sisters, and then I have four brothers. So there's nine of us total.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is I
yeah.
only asked because I'm the youngest of five.
Ah,
And so even no
gotcha.
matter like even when I was in my 30s and 40s, I
Yeah.
was my mom would still say, and this is our baby. So
Ah, that's so
and I'm sure
funny.
the youngest in your family probably gets
Yeah.
that too.
Oh
Uh
yeah, I'm tired of it.
I'm sure. Trust me, they do.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask. So you talk about the aunt and the uncle, very hardcore
Yeah.
Mormons. They're
Oh
very
yeah.
very
Uh-huh.
strict in their ways. And now, so they're not really. We're not doing spoilers, but they're not really
Mhm.
the antagonists of the story. Like there really
Oh,
isn't a.
yeah.
There isn't like someone
Uh-huh.
trying to stop Katie from achieving her goal, but they are
Yeah.
definitely an obstacle for her.
Hmm.
So was it challenging, as you said, like I guess your editor said to you had to dial them back. I mean, were they like
Hmm.
really just mean before and then you had to kind of like, crank it down a little
Yeah.
bit?
I wouldn't say that they're mean because I think this is coming from a lived experience, and I realize that like I feel like Mormons are really well-intentioned people if indoctrinated. So like they we're just deeply indoctrinated. And when you're so deeply indoctrinated, you can't comprehend. And this is why like I feel like the story had to kind of be told with well, one, I feel like the story had to be told with a religious subcontext because, first of all, she's going on dates inspired by the love languages. And Gary Chapman, the guy who wrote the or created the love languages, he is like a very strong, I believe, evangelical Christian. And so having this sort of like religious background just kind of made sense for the plot as well. But I feel like me personally, growing up with like a lot of that indoctrination, you don't have room to discover yourself when other people are constantly telling you who you are. And so like that was one of the reasons why I felt like I had such an estranged relationship with myself, like with my culture, with my gender, with my sexuality, with like my religious preferences, everything, because everything was always told to me. And so I wanted Aunt Joanna and Uncle Nick to be those characters that told Katie who she had to be, put her in this mold, and challenged her self-discovery from that aspect.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. So again, no spoilers, but were there
Yeah.
any parts of the book that were especially challenging to write? Maybe like from a personal
Mhm.
perspective, or
Yeah.
even from a story or plot perspective, kind of like, oh, I've written
Mhm.
myself into a corner. How do I get myself out? Or was it just more kind of like, I'm not really sure if this is the right way to tell the story?
Hmm. Yeah, so I definitely think the ending, because it is a slow burn romance, and I wanted it to be fulfilling for the reader. I think also coming from a place where like I didn't really get to explore my sexuality. My husband is literally the only guy I've ever dated, and like I always am a little bit self-conscious about how to write romances in that regard because I feel like I don't have much experience to pull from. And so I would kind of ramble and it would kind of go nowhere. And I think another issue that I had was like growing up, I had a lot of like purity culture kind of
Hmm.
indoctrinated into me. And so to be able to kind of like be vulnerable in the aspect of romance is really is something that I'm still learning to unpackage even at like 32 years old today. Or no, I'm 31. I forget. Whatever.
Well, happy
You'll
birthday either way.
yeah. Um, yeah, so I think like with the romance, it was a little bit tricky, but I think being surrounded by women, of course, I think really helped me allow myself to have more of that romance in my life and to be able to give fictional characters more of that romance and in turn kind of like help me heal from a lot of that purity culture and the things that I was never really allowed to have when I was Katie's age.
Yeah, actually, that is something I was wondering because it is
Mhm.
a YA story, so
Yeah.
there are romantic elements, but there's nothing really
Mhm.
straightforward about sex, and
Yeah.
that's a relatively chaste relationship between
Yeah.
Katie and Toby. Now, was that is again because it's set in kind of like the Mormon culture? Was that
Yeah.
a contributing factor to it, or was that kind of your objective from the outset, just kind of like keep things very
Mhm.
PG?
Yeah. I think it was a little bit of both. I did kind of want to keep it more on the PG side because I felt like it would be easier for readers to kind of relate to it in the sense that like there's no cursing. I don't think they say like the Lord's name in vain or anything like that. And of course there's no like intense making out or anything like that. It's very mild, very tame.
Hmm.
And I think maybe when I initially wrote it, it came from a place of like purity culture, which is why maybe it feels very chaste. But I also feel like I intentionally did that because like there really is like as someone who has deconstructed from a lot of like that stuff, I don't feel like there's anything shameful about the fact that like romance is awkward. For instance, I literally had never even had my hand held until I was 19 years old. And so literally just like Toby, because he literally he's never even this is his first relationship too, and he's 19 years old in this story. And so like there really is nothing wrong with having something so tame and so mild when you are that age because like I literally went through that. So um just wanted to I kind of wanted to like play into a little bit of both of that, I think.
Yeah, I think the one thing about the whole story that I was a little shocking to me, just because of the
Mhm.
way everything had been playing out, is the aunt's comment to Katie when she sees
Mhm.
that she's wearing makeup. That
Oh yeah. Mhm.
I'll say she calls her she says, "Well, you look like a whore." It's like, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh
"Wow,
yeah,
that came out of nowhere."
yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. There is, I guess, that word. Yeah, the W word.
The W
I
word,
forgot.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. There was. Yeah.
Well,
Um,
but that's almost it's like it's
mhm.
like a big big stop sign all of a sudden in the story. It's like wow, like where is the story going to go from here? But you never
Yeah.
really it doesn't go that way.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
they touch on it a little bit more during the course of the story. So
Mhm.
again, it's a really charming story. So Stephanie Valentine. So what's next? I mean, we mentioned that
Mhm.
your next book, Love Makes Mochi, comes out
Mhm.
next year, but I mean,
Yeah.
have you thought about like what happens next with Katie and Toby? I mean, is there a
Yeah.
story in the works about their developing relationship?
Yeah, actually, so if I guess if First Love Language does well, I do have a sequel in mind. And I guess I'll kind of like keep those ideas under wraps for now.
Sure.
But like the first one is called First, so obviously the second title would have something to do with seconds.
Hmm.
And then I think if I'm allowed to, I would ideally like to make this a young adult duology and then pivot into like an adult duology as well, following the same characters with like a time jump in between. Feel like that would
Oh,
be kind of fun to do. But also in the regard of like what's next for my future, I did recently sign with two new literary agents, and we are planning on going on sub with my adult rom-com, or like rom-drom-com as I like to call it, because there is a splash of that like that depth, I think, to it. But we're gonna go on sub this year. And then Love Makes Mochi comes out February 2026. I am currently on a deadline with that one as well.
okay.
It is not fun to be on deadlines over the holidays, by the way. It sucks.
Can you just give like a teaser about what
Yeah,
Love Makes Mochi is about?
absolutely. Yeah. Or wait, can I?
Well, if you
Oh,
can't, you can't. That's okay. Just.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's fully been announced yet, but essentially it's the third book in a series. The first book is written by my friend Raven K. Stringfield, the second book is written by Ashna Abashat, and the third book is written by me. So it's about it's I think imagine Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, but each girl goes to a different place to study abroad. So the first book is Raven's and her character goes to France. The next one is Ashna's, and she goes to India.
Hmm.
And then my character goes to Japan, and she has a sapphic relationship with her mentor's daughter. And I think that's all I can really say about it at this time because I don't think the full announcement has come out yet.
Okay, no problem. And that is next year.
Yes, next February.
Okay. Stefany Valentine, this has been great. And once again, the book, First Love Languages. When is this due for release?
Um, I believe it is January 14th, 2025. So depending
Okay.
on when you're listening to this, it'll either be out or it'll be coming out.
So right around the time of release of this episode, that is fantastic. So
Oh,
Stefany, where
perfect.
can people find
Uh-huh.
you online to find out more about you and your writing?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question because they're banning TikTok, right? So for the most part I've been on Instagram at Books by Stephanie on Instagram. I'm also on Blue Sky and I'm also on Threads, though I do prefer Blue Sky to Threads. And I think just depending on how much free time I have next year, I'm really considering opening up a YouTube channel just
Oh,
'cause I
awesome.
do like that long form content for sure.
And I think we mentioned it at the beginning of the show. You do have a website.
Oh yes, I do. Yes. I'm not very active on that website, but I do have one, and I do need to start setting up a an email list, I think. So I've been told by my writing friends that that is something I should do.
Okay, and that is it's
Yeah.
stephanievalentine.wordpress.com.
Yeah, stephanievalentine.wordpress.com.
Excellent. Okay, well, Stefany Valentine, once again, thank you so much for being here. And again, your book is First Love Languages. Should be available pretty much right about nowish, we will say.
Oh, gotcha.
So you can,
Okay.
I'm assuming you can get it on her website or on Amazon or anywhere where fine books are sold.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today, Stefany.
Of course.
Viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. For social media for me, you can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ.blog, still on that thing called Twitter at Maximum_Z, and this show's account is at Podcast CWL, at Pez Screenwriting for Instagram and Blue Sky. That's just me. And you can feel free to check out my Go Ahead and Ask books on Amazon. Those are the ones about screenwriting and Pi, two very wonderful things. Like I said, that's Stefany. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.